Okay, good afternoon and welcome to the fourth and last session that I had with you for this course, current topics in literatures in English. Although this is actually the 12th session of the whole course because Sune taught for 4 sessions, followed by Peter for 4 sessions, and I am concluding my 4th session today. And it's the same course, and you're going to do one exam, but you're choosing one of the 3 areas or one of the many areas we have touched in the course to do your essays in. Yeah, and we shall have next Monday as the concluding session for the whole course, which brings together Sune, Peter, myself, and all of you on Zoom, where we shall be brainstorming and discussing your topics for the final exam essay. So do not forget that. The first thing I want to remind you about in that regard is that next Monday's session is going to be exclusively on Zoom, unless something changes. Yeah, if something changes along the line, perhaps Peter would write to all of us and say otherwise. But for now, I think we agree that it will be all on Zoom. But if something changes, he will be writing. And if he's writing, we will follow the same format we have been following. It would mean that even if people are to be here next week, there won't be you. There will be the people who are on Zoom today. But for now, it is decided that we shall all be meeting via Zoom on Monday, the 30th. For the last session. And I have to remind you that the end of semester evaluation, that is the feedback for this course, has been opened today in Blackboard. And please, you are reminded that you have to fill in the evaluation form between today and the latest on Sunday, the 29th. But it would do us a lot of good if you can complete the evaluation by Friday at the latest, because we would like to have an idea about your feedback. We would like to get your comments before we come for the last session, so that if there are some pertinent issues that arise in your comments through the evaluation, and of course they're going to be anonymous, then we can maybe try to discuss them in the final session. And one other thing that is important to note in the same direction is that I personally think that when it comes to the end of course evaluation, because there are different parts of it. There are parts, for example, that ask you questions about the course material, the choice of reading material and stuff like that, but also questions about the actual classroom teaching, the actual classroom interaction between you and the teachers, the actual pedagogical exchanges that we have had. And if I take my case, for example, I know that many people have not attended my sessions because I think you are about 40 or more, and I've never had a session where we were up to 20 people, I'm not sure. Even I mean like both people physically present in class and people on Zoom. So it will be important that during the evaluation session, each person is responsible enough not to comment on class discussions if they did not take part in the class discussions, either physically or or through Zoom. So it's important to do it. I think in those cases, if somebody is honest and they know that they did not attend class discussions, it's preferable to say not applicable, or to choose the options and say not applicable, or to allow the questions unanswered. But to answer for the other aspects of the course that they are pretty sure they have actually done or participated in, like reading of the course material, because it's expected that we have all read the course material for all the sessions, even if we have not come to class every day, whether physically or through Zoom. So do we have a question about these important reminders? And I think they're actually fair. It's actually fair that it's fair and normal and reasonable that somebody shouldn't comment on actual classroom interaction if they didn't take part in actual classroom interaction, either physically or through Zoom. Okay. So, any questions from Zoom? Okay. Okay. So to start off today, the main text we shall be discussing in the last hours of today is Ekpe Inyang's The Last Hope, but we have two theoretical texts, the one about producing poverty and nature in Africa, and the one called Nature TM Inc., the new frontier of environmental conservation. But before we go to those, I would like to start by giving a kind of mini lecture that contextualizes, because today we are talking about Ekpe Inyang, who is from Cameroon, and we are also talking more about conservation. And you remember that in our last class, it has been more about petrocultures and petrofiction and stuff like that, or energy humanities and oil in art and literature, with examples from North America, but more from Nigeria and the Niger Delta. And so today we are shifting our attention towards the Congo Basin. So now what I'm going to do is have some slides that I will use to say a few things, to contextualize, to talk about the Congo Basin. And I will just share the link now on Zoom. So even for those of you who are in class, if it is possible, can you sign in onto Zoom so that I can just copy the link and then I paste into the chat, and then you click it and you open, and then we can go through that together. Because I'm afraid I may want to share my screen, and then I have the kind of accident I had last week. I wanted to share my screen, and then the video cut, like I was recording, and then the session cut, and I was locked out of the session. Okay, it's there. Try it and let me know if everybody has access. Have you here in class joined? Okay. Okay. Oh, okay. Good. Awesome. So the Congo, Ekpe Inyang, to start off, comes from the Anglophone part of Cameroon, like myself, and he is a poet, he is a playwright, but he's most importantly, he is an environmentalist. And so he comes from what I call the Congo Basin. It's not just me, because Cameroon is actually part of the Congo Basin. And the Congo Basin, as you would see in the second slide, is the second largest tropical rainforest in the world after the Amazon. So it has about 2 million square kilometers of humid forest, an area about the size of Mexico, including, it has secondary and then savanna forest, and then it equals about 3 million square kilometers, almost half the size of continental USA. And the basin is defined by the watershed of the Congo River, located primarily in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, with smaller portions in Gabon, the Republic of Congo, which is called Congo Brazzaville, Cameroon, Central African Republic, and Equatorial Guinea. The basin is home to a lot of species of fauna and flora, For instance, mountain gorillas, lowland gorillas, chimpanzees, and forest elephants, as well as approximately 1,000 species of birds. And the basin is also home to over 75 million people. So, because it cuts across about 6 countries in Central and West Africa, we can say. And among these countries, I have to make it clear again, because I'm here in the English department, but I would mention in passing some stuff that is not in English, because although Ekpe Inyang writes in English, because there is a minority part of Cameroon which is Anglophone, like about, let's say, about 2/5 of Cameroon is Anglophone or English speaking, and then the rest is French speaking or Francophone. And Ekpe Inyang comes from there. But apart from the English speaking part of Cameroon, like much of the rest of the Congo Basin is French speaking. And that's why, like most other writers that I will have to mention in passing in this lecture will be people who write in French, but most, for those who come from Anglophone Cameroon, like Ekpe or myself or Mbolomboy, they write in English. And then from Equatorial Guinea, they write in Spanish. Well, when we say write in English or in Spanish, we mean like European languages or colonial languages, but obviously they are local languages, they are African languages, there are ethnic languages within those countries that people also sometimes write in. But the dominant ones are the colonial ones or the European ones. So, and so far, when I look at literature written around the Congo Basin, I mean environmental literature, what I call eco-literature, like explicitly environmental literature about ecological decay, ecological collapse, ecological degradation, literature about climate change. That's what I mean. As compared to Nigeria, where a lot of literature is written about oil because of the Niger Delta, little or almost nothing has been written about oil in the Congo Basin, but there is actually oil exploration and exploitation also taking place in many of the countries of the Congo, in fact, in all of the countries of the Congo Basin. And so far, the only novel I am aware of, which is forthcoming and tackles environmental issues, oil particularly, is Mbolomboy's How Beautiful We Were. And it is slated for publication in the US next year, I think next summer. It was actually meant to be published this fall, and then because of the corona pandemic, it had to be shifted. But some of the major themes that run across the literature that I've read so far from this basin, and I'm speaking particularly about Congo Brazzaville and Cameroon, because these are the countries that I'm working on for my PhD dissertation. So some of the themes include nature or biodiversity conservation, usually through the model of national parks and national reserves, what is called a fortress conservation. Have you heard about fortress conservation before? Okay, so fortress conservation is opposed to the kind of conservation practice in Europe and most of much of North America, wherein humans and the other animals and plants share a conserved or a protected area together. Like people are not asked to move out of a zone because it has to be conserved or it has to become a national park. But the sad reality in the global south, in most countries in Africa and Latin America, but particularly in Africa where I know, is that people are asked to leave zones, and those zones are called national parks or national reserves. And then people are prohibited. And actually, they are the people who have been living there before the programs come. They are prohibited from going into those places again to harvest anything like wood or to hunt. And so it is, the fortress idea comes from like a big barrier. It's like a big barrier, a big strong wall has been erected between the people who were formerly part of the ecosystem and then what becomes a protected area. And in this kind of protection model or conservation model, a priority seems to be given only to animals and plant species, but not humans. Although there is a semblance of always claiming that, oh, the people will be relocated, they will be resettled in new areas, but that's for the most part never really the case. So that's what we call fortress conservation, the conservation where people are prohibited from getting access to the place that is under protection, whereas they had that access until the project came. Then other issues that come out or come up in this literature include deforestation, timber exploitation, and a lot of timber is exploited, a lot of wood is felled and shipped to Europe and shipped to America and shipped to Asia from these countries. Then agriculture and the domestic use of forest resources, hunting and the poaching. If you look at my slides, you will see that I've written poaching in quotes, and that's because that's a very bad or dangerous binary that operates in conservation literature and conservation practices in Africa and elsewhere in the global south, where local inhabitants of an area are often projected or conceived as being dangerous to the species of their zone. And then suddenly they are called poachers if they kill an animal in that area. But then Western tourists are allowed to come and hunt there in the name of game hunting. And so when a Western tourist comes and pays some money and they are actually called a hunter or a game hunter, and they are, for the most part, tourists are hunting for fun. Not even because they have to eat the animals, but the locals who had been depending on these animals until the project comes up are now called poachers. And poaching carries a lot of negative connotations. They're like the criminal guys killing the elephants, the criminal guys killing the animals. So yeah, that's why I put that in quotes. So protected fauna species, human-animal relations, these are some of the stuff that comes up in the literature, or spiritual and sacred connections to literature, because to nature, sorry. So the spiritual dimension is also very important when it comes to communities such as this one, where apart from the fact that on the surface, we all see Christianity and Islam, there are actually a lot of religious practices in different parts of Africa, and which have different kinds of special connections and attachments to nature. Then other themes that come up are things like pollution, water pollution, air pollution, or rapid urbanization, where, because it's a known fact that in these parts of the world, the human demographics are growing higher than it is happening now in Europe or in America. Yeah, and then issues like corruption and bad governance. So some of the writers in this basin who write, because I'm talking particularly about writers who write consciously, explicitly, deliberately about environmental or climate change issues. I think we all agree that theories like ecocriticism can actually be applied to even texts like Shakespeare's plays, for example, which were written at a time when like almost nobody was talking about climate change or environmental problems. But again, so we have like two broad sets of texts that deal with climate change, or that can be read from an eco-critical perspective. Any text can be read from an eco-critical perspective, but there are also texts that are explicitly written on environmental issues. And so these guys I'm mentioning here are mostly the people who write this explicit, this deliberate literature about environmental issues. So there is Ekpe Inyang. He is a conservationist from the Anglophone part of Cameroon. He has a Master's of Science in Environmental Studies from the University of Strathclyde in the UK. He has worked for the Wildlife Conservation Society in the past, and he is currently working for Worldwide Fund for Nature, WWF. And he has also consulted for the German Technical Cooperation Agency, formerly known as GTZ and known now as GIZ. It's just like, I think there is also a kind of Danish foreign aid agency under the Danish Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And then we have similar things in the US and the UK, like US aid or UK aid, or even the JICA, the Japanese International Agency for Cooperation and Development. So, cooperation, economic cooperation, cultural cooperation, all this stuff is part of diplomacy nowadays. Yeah, good. He's a poet. I mean, Ekpe Inyang, a playwright, and he was the winner of the Echo Prize for Emerging Anglophone Writers in the poetry category in 2014. He has published 8 plays, 4 scientific articles, a book, chapter, 2 major textbooks, and 8 poetry anthologies. Then he has also published plays, including some of the plays he has published include The Hill Baba's Last Hope, The Swamps, and then yeah, we have The Last Hope to discuss today. And then he has published poetry collections like Death of Hardship, Dangerous Pastime, and Silent Voices, and Any and Other Poems, and Just a Bend, which was just released, I think, about a few weeks ago. Another writer from Anglophone Cameroon who also writes about environmental issues and has also been a conservationist is Emmanuel Sama Lyon. He has written a poetry collection known as Green Doctrine. So a poetry collection called Green Doctrine, and is all about conservation and issues of climate change and environment or ecology. And he has a bachelor's degree in environmental management, and he has studied briefly too in South Africa, and he has worked as a wildlife manager or conservationist with the Cameroonian government. And he worked for so many years and has actually gone on retirement now, and he's running an NGO. And he's a poet, he's a novelist, and he's a filmmaker. So his novel, which is environmentally rich, is Green Doctrine. Then there is this guy, Jose Collins Kouanye. He comes from the French part of Cameroon. He lives in Congo now, and he has co-written a play with the Congolese minister known as Henri Njombo, and the play is known as Le Cri de la Forêt, like the scream of the forest, if we can translate that into English. Yeah, okay. So, and then he also runs an environmental NGO while he is in the Congo, and I mean Congo Brazzaville, and he is also a technical assistant at the Congolese Ministry of Environment, but he comes from Cameroon. So when I insist that I'm saying Congo Brazzaville, this is just to remind you that there are two Congos. There are two Congos. There is the big Congo, which is the former Belgian Congo. It is today called the Democratic Republic of the Congo. But sometimes we just call it Congo Kinshasa, because we try to call them, when we want to go for the short forms, we use their capitals to distinguish them. So when we say Congo Kinshasa, we mean the Democratic Republic of the Congo, which was formerly a Belgian colony with a lot of atrocities committed by the Belgian King Leopold. Then the other Congo, which was formerly a French colony, is today known as the Republic of Congo, and the capital is in Brazzaville, so we often call it Congo Brazzaville to distinguish it from the other Congo. But one thing is that Jose Kouanye is not one of those kind of authors that I've called authors with a background, a professional or educational background in environment or nature protection or conservation or stuff like that, or biology. He is one of the exemptions or the exceptions here, because he actually studied literary studies. Then again, in Anglophone Cameroon, there was Christopher Athanasius Salai. He was a maritime administrator, and he wrote two novels. And one of those novels is an environmental novel or an eco novel known as The Buffalo Rider. And I've written an article involving this novel and two other novels by other writers I'll be mentioning shortly. Then, of course, there is Henri Njombo. He is a politician in Congo Brazzaville. He is currently the Minister of Agriculture and Livestock, and he was formerly the Minister of Environment. He writes so many novels. He has written so many novels, but then he also writes plays. He has written 3 plays, including the one that he co-wrote with Jose Collins Kouanye on deforestation. And he has also written a novel, an unpublished novel now as we speak, which is about also conservation or environmental issues, and also the displacement or the maltreatment of indigenous peoples within the Congo basin. And he has a master's degree in forestry economics and has been a politician for as long as I can remember. Then there is also Asitu Ndinga from the same Congo Brazzaville. He has a PhD in biology. He has worked for so many international conservation NGOs, like the International Union for the Conservation of Nature, IUCN. And currently, he is the program director for Wetlands International in Dakar, in Senegal, West Africa. He's an essayist and a novelist. He has written so many essays about conservation in the Congo Basin, but all of these are in French. Essays such as Domination et Résistance, Domination and Resistance in Central Africa, essays such as the management of Central African forest with or without the consent. I'm trying to translate titles from French anyway. And then his novel, which is also very interesting on conservation, is known as Les Marchands du Développement Durable. That is the merchants or the sellers of sustainable development. Yeah. Good. And then if we take Jose Collins, we can bring him back again here under the kind of writers, I say writers without a background in ecological or environmental studies or professions. And here again in Anglophone Cameroon, I would think about Nola Lembong. He is a poet and he's a professor. He's also a traditional, he's also a king. He has written a lot of poetry that's environmentally focused, including collections like Forest Echoes, Green Call, etc. Then there is a novelist and professor of literature from the Francophone Cameroon, Patrice Ngana. He lectures in the US. He has written novels like Temps de Chien, actually translated into English as Dog Days, and La Saison de Prune. So Dog Days is one of the novels I've written about in combination with the Buffalo Rider, from the perspective of animal criticism or zoocriticism within ecocriticism, like our relationships to animals, whether they are domestic or they are wild. And then, of course, and there is also Gaston Paul Effa. He's also from French Cameroon, based in France as a philosophy professor. And he has written several novels, including Cheval Roi, like Horse King, if we can translate it that way, Horse King, Cheval Roi, Tout ce bleu, Le Dieu perdu dans l'herbe, etc. And then, so the article I'm talking about is combines the Buffalo Rider, Dog Days, and Horse King. And then Mbolo Mbowe, I mentioned him at the beginning today. I said she is the only writer from this zone that I know so far who has written about petrol or oil. But unfortunately, the novel is not yet available. Otherwise, we would have had a look at that. And that would have been wonderful to have a female perspective. So if you notice that we have not had any female author so far in the course, particularly in Africa, it's actually because I didn't find one within this kind of framework of writers writing explicitly about environmental concerns. So the only one I know is Mbolo, but her novel is not yet out. And then maybe I can also add myself here because some of my poems also deal with the environmental concerns, yeah, both in English and in French. And some of the collections where such poems can be seen would be Bites of Insanity and then Constimocracy, subtitled Mal-Africanizing Democracy. And I publish everything literary under the pen name Sa Mala. So basically, this is some kind of background to environmental writing in the Congo Basin. And so Ekpe Inyang, whose play we shall be discussing today, fits within this environment. So we have to view him as belonging to this geographic spot, but also this literary space with a lot of multiculturalism and multilingualism and diversities of different forms, whether they are geographical diversities or cultural diversities. Yeah. Yes.
All these environmental writers also seem to be, working with something besides literature, as a conservationist or technical assistant, maritime administrator.
Yeah.
Is there a reason for that?
Good question. And that's actually, these writers are the core of my PhD project. And I actually chose them because of that interesting observation I had also made. I had noticed that they had this kind of backgrounds, either they are ecologists or conservationists or technical advisors to ministries, and then they're writing about environmental stuff. Yeah, I think, yes, of course. I read their writing of literature on environmental issues as, first of all, an acknowledgement on their part that ecological sciences are not able alone to sort out the puzzles of environmental problems. So they understand that literature is a vehicle, a tool through which we can reach wider audiences about stuff that would otherwise not be read if it was maybe in technical files or technical reports and stuff like that. So, and then again, I call this background informed activism. So I call their literature activist literature, but which is different from other forms of activist literature. For example, there is a slight difference between their activist literature and the activist literature of Ken Saro-Wiwa, whom we have discussed in this class, because Saro-Wiwa comes into activism from the perspective of the people, the oppressed people, the exploited people. But then these are writers who come instead from the perspective of conservation or environmental protection. So you get so there are different kinds of activism that are going on here. And so I wanted to really investigate this and see how the play out, how their backgrounds inform their writing and what. So generally speaking, I think they use literature as an extension of the work that they do in this field within their professional confines. Whether they are a minister, politically has a responsibility over environmental protection, but then turning to literature, they're using literature as a tool for awareness raising, a tool for awareness raising or conscientization to an extent, yeah. And then to just conclude this, as I've already said, the most interesting read I have or I take of this is that it's an implicit acknowledgement of the power or the potential of literature in interfering or intervening in real life problems. Does that answer your question? Okay, good. Any other question? The people in Zoom, questions? Were you able to follow his question and my answer? Did you follow the question and answer? Okay, okay, fine. Fair enough. Look at that program. Okay, so I would prefer now that we go on a short break and we reconvene at exactly 4 p.m. Yeah, 4. I'm wondering, okay, yeah, people have started coming back on Zoom. So we are going to continue from here. Let's discuss the theoretical text that you had to read before today's session. We will start with Producing Nature and Poverty in Africa, Continuity and Change by Richard Schroeder. Do you have questions or specific comments or sections of the article that you want to talk about, or questions for clarification? After having read this, is actually an introduction to a book, to an edited volume on conservation in Africa. So do you have some parts of it that you didn't understand that were not clear to you and you would like us to discuss them now? Or do you have questions to ask about it?
So if I understand correctly, there are, two main threads. Mentions both the long-range view of historical continuity and the more fine-range political economic analysis of recent policy changes. I don't know if you could say, just a few words on that. So one.
Where you there? Which page are you on?
I'm 341.
Oh, okay.
In the bottom.
Yeah.
The line of historical continuity
and
the line of contemporary policy changes. So is that just to have, a diachronic and a synchronic view on it?
Yeah, it's like some of the authors, because this is in reference to the contributions of the authors in the book that we have not read anyway, but like some of them have taken a kind of, for lack of a better word, let's say a kind of longer durée look at how conservation has gone on the continent for as long as possible, retrospectively, going back into the past, whereas others have focused more on recent changes or recent economic and political policies and trends in the sector. Yeah. And this actually brings together people working in different fields related to development and conservation. Although none of them is a literary scholar per se, but the social scientific perspectives that they open up in this article are useful for us in the kind of analysis we can produce on the works we are reading, like The Last Hope, for example. So basically, this article points to something that is true, but at the same time, something that is debatable and something that is often something for which there are often attempts to conceal or to hide within NGOs that work for conservation. And remember that this article is written within a context where conservation efforts and measures are undertaken mostly, for the largest part, by NGOs from the Western world and with funding from the Western world. And so it's some kind of environmental do-goodism, or yeah, some kind of environmental do-goodness to people. But it comes with a lot of problems, especially the fact that while nature is seemingly preserved, and especially in the name of promoting sustainable development, we instead find that most of the people whose livelihoods depend on areas that get to be protected, that get to be conserved, instead fall into poverty and misery in the process, in a process that is purported to be out there to help them, to help them get out of poverty while preserving their forests, for example. So, and then this is bringing us back to the question you asked earlier today about, no, not you asked, I asked you guys if you know about fortress conservation. So you see, fortress conservation is what actually produces this poverty and nature in Africa, because it is premised on a wrong assumption. It pits people and animals, or people and their natural resources, as enemies or as antagonists. And so people are locals or natives or indigenous people are considered to pose as a threat, as a danger to their own environments, and so they have to be protected. Like those environments have to be protected against them, and then they are deprived of several things, so many things, not just the resources that they need from there for their daily livelihood, but also the kind of spiritual and cultural connections and attachments that they have with those places. And what is very disturbing, if you read, there is a French scholar who has written a book very recently known as Le Colonialisme Vert. It means green colonialism. And again, you can also read the famous book known as Green Imperialism. So you will find that this model of conservation in Africa, the kind of model of conservation that the Last Hope seems to be out to project and to promote, is actually the whole cause of the problems that we have as diagnosed by this chapter here, or this introductory chapter, the production of poverty alongside the production of nature. As a reminder, on Zoom, if you have a question or you want to speak, please just unmute yourself and you start speaking. Okay, so we're going to go through a few excerpts of the article. Let's go to page 341. Yes, 341. In the middle paragraph, shed some light to the question you just asked about this approach of some people having gone far back in the past and some having focused on recent changes in policy and practices. So they say the emphasis is on the continuity of environmental intervention, tracing back to the earliest stages of the colonial period. And the summary impression is that the environmental policies have for decades done little to alleviate and have at times contributed directly to the exacerbation of poverty across the continent. Just like the people in the oil-rich parts of the Delta states, or the Delta region, or the Delta region of Nigeria, who are custodians, we should say, of oil and are poor. Here we are talking about people who are custodians of forest and biodiversity resources, or at least have lived with them for hundreds or thousands of years in some cases, and they are deprived of the benefits they can derive from there, not in a commercial manner, not in a capitalist manner, but at least for basic survival. And some of the people who suffer a lot from this, particularly if, let's go to page 342, in the case of the Congo Basin, apart from the locals, such as the local people that we see in the Last Hope by Ekpe Inyang, around the Corrupt National Park, which is the first national park in the rainforest of Cameroon, is that we have indigenous people in Cameroon and in Congo and in the two Congos and the Central African Republic, who actually up to that still live in the forest and have always lived in those forests. But because of reasons of conservation, they are often now forced to move out of the forest and then they do not even practice some kind of settled life. They're more or less nomadic in their lifestyle, because they go through the forest, they sieve the forest, they always move in search of the basics for their life, food, and then they construct temporary shelter. But then when they are forced out of this kind of lifestyle and they're asked to settle, and then to adopt the lifestyle, the capitalist lifestyle that has already been imposed on people outside of the forest, it becomes very problematic. And that's why we can refer to this quote here from Neumann, the quote by Neumann, the indented quote. Many of the projects sound alarmingly similar to the fortress-style approach to protected areas that they supposedly replace. So what are the implications? What are the consequences? Forced relocations, curtailment of resource access, abuses of power by conservation authorities, and increased government surveillance are reported more often than as successful integrations of local people into conservation management. This is actually the fate of many people who live in communities where they are protected areas, whether they are national parks or they are reserves. Permit me share with you, I think it was earlier this year around, I didn't know, it was around the summer. I was watching a short footage on Facebook where some military people were brutalizing some 2 young men because they have gone into the forest and then they've hunted some 2 animals. And those are, you didn't need to get further information to know that those were actually poor guys who could only survive by either eating those animals they have got there or maybe just from the dressing and everything. But here you saw 2 soldiers and 1 forest ranger who were brutalizing them, who were beating them up, who were asking them to confess, and they were slapping them. And that is representative. That is representative of the kind of violence that people suffer from in the hands of conservation in most areas of the basin. And so I think that this discussion today should be helping us think about what alternative ways do we have to conservation there. Yeah, because we all agree that it's important to preserve biodiversity. We all agree that the Congo Basin is an important reservoir for the sequestration of carbon, and that it is particularly crucial for the reduction of carbon emissions globally. And that is why if you read through the Paris Agreement on Climate Change, you understand that there is emphasis on countries that have this kind of places like the Amazon Basin in Latin America or the Congo Basin in Africa to be preserved, so that at least it can help us to reach the target goals of not going beyond 2 degrees Celsius of global warming. But then for us to do this, we must not focus only on the global needs or the global demands or the global problems, and then forget the people that live in those places and are highly affected by the kind of policies that we apply there in the name of protection and conservation. Any question up to now? Yes.
Those people affected.
Yes.
I guess they just live, in perfect symbiosis with the nature.
Yeah.
They are not harming nature in any way, are they?
They're not.
Okay.
But now, when that is a good question. And so what I'm saying is that when an area is declared a national reserve, for example, or a national park, then they are asked to quit it and never to go in there. Mm-hmm. And in most cases, they are not only asked to quit, perhaps, and maybe go to another forest that is not protected, but they're actually asked to quit and settle, so that we should bring to them civilization, we bring them schools, we bring them hospitals, we bring them roads. Most of these things are always promised and never delivered. And even when they are delivered, there is still a problem, because we do not think that that's actually what those people want, because they have their own way of life and they're happy about it. And we've actually never seen them sit and write a letter and send to any NGO or government asking for them to come and provide them with education or provide them with different forms of accommodation from the temporary ones that they're used to, which means that they are happy. They are satisfied with their kind of way of life, yeah.
Okay, so would it, be accurate to see it like, the whole big capitalist part of the world, producing the problem, and trying to solve that
Exactly.
Okay.
Good observation.
Okay.
So, and that is a perfect link between this article and the next one, which is called Nature Inc. Because the driving force behind all of this thing is capitalism. If the real reason for conservation in the Congo Basin or in the Amazon or in Australia was actually because we just care for nature, we just want to preserve the biodiversity and we don't have any economic and monetary attachments to that, we will not find the kind of things that we find happening now. So, and that is why these people, one of the promises that always bring is the promise of sustainable development, which in itself, first of all, is already an oxymoron. Is a contradictory. It's a contradiction in itself to think that we can develop sustainably, because development and sustainability don't go together. Most, if not all, resources that we use for development are exhaustible. We can finish them. And so, but now what happens is that people are often promised sustainable development, and the first thing that comes up in the case of conservation, like in Cameroon or in Congo Brazzaville or in Congo Kinshasa, is that people are promised that their area will be turned into a nice tourist destination, and then the tourists will come and they will have services. But for the most part, those things never happen. Or even when they do happen, in some cases where they do happen, the money generated by ecotourism does not trickle down to the people affected, which brings us back to the production of poverty. Because these are people who had been asked to leave their lands, to leave the forest on which they depend for food and stuff. And then the promise that their lives will be made better when roads will be constructed and people will start coming and looking at the animals and paying you guys. But then that never happens. What happens is that they end up being poor. Yeah. And then while some money is actually raised in the process, because for the cases where there is active ecotourism going on, money is actually generated, but it goes into the wrong hands. Either people embezzle the money, for example, government officials embezzle the money, and then the locals are deprived of the benefits that should have come from that. Question from Zoom? No question from Zoom. And then one other thing that is contentious in the Congo Basin is that there is this tendency for some scientists or some scholars, and especially politicians, to want to blame deforestation, because deforestation is one of the most forceful environmental threats in the area. And there is a tendency to blame it on the locals harvesting wood for domestic consumption, because one thing there is energy deficiency. So many people do not have access to electricity. And because they don't have access to electricity, what happens is that they depend on the forest, on fuel wood, or what we call firewood, for cooking and other domestic tasks at home. But as I've argued in an article somewhere elsewhere, I'm making this a reference to page 334 here, where Cleaner College discussion of wood fuel gap is brought out in Nigeria, arguing convincingly that this bears little relationship here to the dynamics of, but survives nonetheless because it serves the economic interests of Nigerian government. I actually agree with this, because most governments, and this is the case in one play that I've read by Jumbo and Kouanye, they tend to make it look like, because they're trying to demonize the people, and they're trying to shift every blame, everything that goes wrong with conservation or protection of nature is shifted to the people. From the perspective of conservationists and the government, they usually try to blame the people for their own wrongdoings or for their weaknesses or for their shortcomings. Whereas it's actually proven that what drives a lot of the deforestation in these areas is timber exploitation, where large concessions of forests are signed off to companies from China, to companies from the European Union, to companies from America, to companies from Vietnam, to companies from Japan, to cut down the wood and to ship it away. And in the process of doing that, they do not only destroy the wood that is cut and shipped away, but before one big tree falls down, it destroys even many young trees, for example. And then often, the more they penetrate the forest in search of the big trees to harvest timber from, the more they create space for people who want to go in and farm, who had previously not had the intention of ever going in there for farming. But then because a lot of the people involved in the timber trade, starting from even signing the contracts with the foreign companies, are the government officials. And for the most part, to even the people who are like run businesses and have licenses to fall trees and sell them, are usually people who have connections with the government. Either they work with the government or they give kickbacks to the government. And so then there is this tendency to shift the blame and place it. We are not, or I'm not trying to say that the fuel wood consumption doesn't contribute to deforestation. But what I have tried to point out is that it contributes far lesser than what is actually said to be in comparison to other factors, especially timber exploitation and plantation agriculture in large scale plantation agriculture, the cultivation of oil palm, for example, and rubber and cocoa in large expanses of forest conceded to multinational companies by the government. Questions? Any questions? And another important thing to stress before we go to the next article is the importance of indigenous knowledge systems, indigenous knowledge practices. Because apart from depriving indigenous people of access to forest resources, one other thing that happens, one other thing that occurs as a consequence of forest conservation is that we actually lose an opportunity, we actually miss an opportunity to learn from these indigenous people like the Baka Pygmies in Cameroon or Congo about their way of life, about how they have survived for all these years, living, well, let's say in harmony, in quote, with nature. And they have their own medical system. They know what they harvest from the forest and use as whether they are leaves or roots of plants. They know what the seasons entail. They know what to do and what to eat or where to go during which season. So there are a lot of things that can actually be learned from them, from their worldview, from their cosmology, from their feeding and eating habits, from their medical or medicinal practices. But a lot of this is pushed to the ends, is pushed out because we think that only science as conceived in the West or only ecology as conceived in the West has the solution or the magic wand to conservation. And so this, in a sense, leads to epistemicide. Because imagine that you displace, you relocate, you force out people from a community who had some practices out of which scientists, scholars can draw lessons, for example, that can be applicable to even humanity at large. You force them to quit that place and to relocate to a place where they no longer have the same connections that they had with nature, and you have not even studied the way or what they were doing or how they related to nature previously. So the end result is that some of their practices will die out while they are where they were not before. While they're in their new locations, there are some practices they will never again practice, and nobody cares to study them. And that is knowledge that is dying. That is knowledge that is going extinct. So when we are talking extinction in matters of conservation, we should not only focus about extinction of plant species or extinction of animal species, but we should also know that there are other things that go extinct like, for example, other forms of knowledge. Any questions? If no question, then let us discuss the article Nature Inc. Do you have questions on that article? Did you have aspects of the article you needed clarifications on? Let's start there. Nature TM Inc., the new frontiers of environmental conservation. Okay, so now starting on page 3, they write, indeed, the very compatibility of conservation and development has recently been called into question by conservationists, contending that the trade-offs between livelihood and environmental concerns may be largely irreconcilable. And this is true. And this is not only raised by conservationists, this is even raised more forcefully by economics, people working on green economics. I am wondering, have you heard about the term degrowth before? Degrowth is a very related term to ecocriticism, I should say, but which is more applicable or mostly used within the economic sphere. So there are actually a lot of economists now, and there is a center dedicated to degrowth studies in Barcelona, in Spain, who are arguing, and rightfully so, that the present economic system in the world, the capitalist system that we have at hand, we cannot solve the climate crisis and the environmental crisis if we continue along the same line. That in fact, so they remind us and they demonstrate that sustainable development is fiction, that it can't work. Because if we continue to grow our economies, if we continue to measure GDP the way we do, if we continue to put emphasis on the growth of economies, especially GDP, and not maybe on the welfare or well-being of people and their environments and ecosystems, then there is no doubt that we will continue to drive up the levels of emissions of carbon gases and also the levels of the extinction of the species. Because capitalism is, without any doubt, destructive to nature. So on page 4, you see they continue as public funding for conservation grows scarcer and organizations increasingly turn to the private sector to make up the shortfall. Market forces have found their way into conservation policy and practice to a degree unimaginable only a decade ago. So this is another serious issue. The fact that government agencies are curtailing the funding they offer for conservation is forcing conservationists to turn to the private sector. And you remember that the private sector are the guys who go behind the profits. And that's why funding obtained from certain sources comes with strings. And for the most part, they are economic strings. Strings such as maybe people posing for conservationists, as we have seen in plays by Asi Tundinga, people who pose for conservationists and they're actually there to collect data for some researchers, maybe in exchange for money, or promising to turn nature into a commodity, the commodification of nature, so that it should be able to produce profit. Because the money invested into conservation by private partners, by private funders or private sponsors, for the most part, is money which they need to get it back. And so conservation is now allowed to float, let me use this term, to float in the market system like every other commodity, where demand and supply alone and nothing else actually determines the value of nature, the value of our forests, the value of our rivers, the value of our animals, and the value of everything else connected to it. Question? Neoliberalism is, it tries to push for almost no government intervention, in the market. Whereas capitalism from the very beginning is already profit oriented. So capitalism, in other words, is the maximization of profits. But the government has always helped. Governments have always helped to intervene in economic processes in the market, sometimes in order to maybe stop some prices from rising, to sort out problems such as inflation, for example, and to remedy economic crisis or economic depressions. But the more economic liberalism as an ideology or as a political practice is preached nowadays, the more the government is asked out of essential parts of human society where government presence is needed to stop profiteers from trying to make money. For example, water, we all have a right to water, to good potable water, to good drinking water. But more and more, and in nearly every country of the world today, you discover that the provision of water is a service that is either actually privatized completely, or in which the government is a partner with private stakeholders and has very little to do. And so water, which is a common, have you heard about the term the commons? The commons are like even nature is a common. The forest, the trees, the water, the air that we breathe, all these things are commons in that we all own them in the same proportion, in the same, so nobody owns them more than another. We need to have the same level of access to them in order to survive, in order to live. But when the government or governments decide not to treat these things as commons and decide not to treat them as public goods that government invest in and provide them free, and then rather prefer to pass that, to outsource that to private investors, what do? You commercialize water. And so more and more we're getting into instances where if you don't have money, you might die of thirst. Oh, and that is not normally supposed to happen. So if you see the commercialization of water that, as it is happening today, that is because of neoliberalism. Otherwise, that should not have been happening. So neoliberalism, for me, I would say it clears the way for capitalism to thrive. You get the point now? Okay. So if you go to page 7, the last paragraph, and then in the middle, the sentence that starts with, in Harvey's 2005 paradigmatic Marxist reading, neoliberal economics is an ideological smokescreen concealing a more fundamental class project of accumulation by dispossession aimed to employ free market policies for private appropriation of the commons. This sums up what I've been explaining all along. The commons, water, air, the trees, and and other stuff that we need for our basic survival, and which we commonly own, and nobody owns more than another. But what happens is that with neoliberal economics, capitalists are hidden, but they're actually behind everything. And what they're trying to do is that they're trying to accumulate more worth by doing what? By dispossessing us from what we all rightfully own, which is the commons. And so if we study courses as these ones we're studying now in literature or comparative literature or in English, so tomorrow when we become whether advisors to government officials or we work as consultants for companies, we should be able to take a critical look at a lot of the stuff that go around us, whether they're conservation projects in Africa or in Asia or in Latin America or even here in Europe. We should always be skeptical and ask more questions about what are the underlying motivations for the kind of things that are promised to us or are sold to us, especially by politicians or business people, and to ask what are the consequences on the life on Earth. Okay, Lini, I've heard you. So you said, can I please repeat the questions from the people in class? It's hard to hear what's being asked. Okay. And one thing, let me ask for your favor. Is it possible for two of you behind to maybe move a little bit ahead? We have a lot of space here for social distancing. Maybe one person can sit here or maybe here, or you can, yeah. And I will actually be helping you, yeah. So the question that was asked, your name again, please. Yes, Jonas asked a question. What was the difference between capitalism and neoliberalism? I'm sure that for the answer I gave, you all heard the answer, so I will not repeat it. Let me see. Wait, let me look at my program. So we will take the break after we have finished discussing this article, I think. Yeah, although I wanted us to start discussing the last hope before we go on the break, but we can still go on the break and then come and start it. Yeah. Okay. So go to page 9. On page 9, from Neoliberal Environments to Nature, Inc., following McAfee's 1999 prescient identification of the emerging trend involving selling nature to save it. The critical academic literature addressing the process we refer to as Nature TM Inc. became centered on analysis, that is TM Incorporated. I hope you understand the meaning of yeah. On analysis of neoliberal nature. Important trailblazers were McCarthy and Prudham's 2004 seminal paper introducing a special issue of Geoforum, Heinen and Robbins' 25 introductory article in Capitalism, Nature, Socialism, and the spate of writing anthologized in neoliberal environments, Heinen et al., 27, that followed. Alongside this work, the first efforts to conceptualize neoliberal conservation emerged, which analysts point out demands unique mechanisms in order to harness the value of resources in situ. So you understand what they mean by harnessing the value of resources in situ? So we are talking here about this idea of selling nature to save it, meaning that there is an economic movement or trend or tendency nowadays which seeks to make sure that we exploit nature without actually taking it out from where it is. Like, so what best use can we make of the trees without cutting them, of the animals without bringing them down? And so this is where the idea of things like ecotourism steps in. So everything is geared towards generating profits. Although, so in situ means on the spot without moving the thing. So because previously profits have been generated maybe by cutting down the trees and shipping them to other countries or killing the animals and selling. So they are looking for possibilities of getting money from these things without moving them from where they are. Is it clear now? Okay. And so how do you now feel about a play like The Last Hope in the context of such readings? Let's leave this as food for thought and go on break. And we come back at 3 minutes to 5. Yeah. And then we will start discussing the play. Okay, we have to continue now. Shortly before we went on break, we were still discussing the article, Nature TM Incorporated, the New Frontiers of Environmental Conservation. So what I find interesting is this article gives us a lot of useful concepts to talk about the relationship between capitalism and nature conservation, especially in the global south. And by the global south, we are referring to Africa, to Asia, and to Latin America. As we were saying shortly before we went on that break, therefore, there is a tendency nowadays for neoliberal economists or policies to associate or to turn nature into a commodity. And that is why we start talking about concepts such as nature for services instead of nature for needs. Because when we talk about nature for needs, we are talking about nature for basic needs for human survival or the survival of humans and other species with the humans. But once we start talking about nature for services, we are looking at nature from economic eyes, from economic lenses. And then again, we even go as far as these concepts of previously having nature for contemplation. And by nature for contemplation, we are talking about nature having been conceived of in the past as being that place where you go in, you know, we always talk about going into nature. And for a long time, we've actually forgotten that wherever we go, we actually carry nature with us there. That from a materialist perspective, I'm talking about material ecocriticism, for example, or material criticism generally. We are made up of nature. We are nature. We are part of nature, and nature actually doesn't live out there. We live in here. From our cells, our body composition, the blood in our bodies, the water in our bodies, and the bacteria in our stomachs, and all of that stuff. We are part of nature. But now, within the framework of neoliberal conservation, we move from nature for contemplation, not just nature. I want to go for a walk. I want to go into the forest. As go into nature to meditate, to contemplate, to think, to reflect. And you remember the romanticism within British or English literature. Yeah, so that's the conception of nature as nature for contemplation. But now we are in the era of nature for speculation. And what do we mean by nature for speculation? As this article actually teaches us or tells us, is about speculating on the value, on the economic value of nature, and what we can make as profits out of nature. So that we can be able to save nature by selling it. We have to sell nature and then we save it. And what What a beautiful irony. So just before we went on the break, I was therefore asking us, like, what do we think about a play like The Last Hope in view of these readings, in view of producing poverty and nature in Africa, in view of Nature Inc. Incorporated? What do we think?
Well, that it fits the bill, I guess.
Okay.
If you can, definitely see what we've been talking about today
In the play. Yeah. Okay. Okay, yeah. And we will definitely be coming back to that in more details through the questions that I share with you, because we'll be answering our discussion of this play will focus on those, we use those questions to discuss the play. But just before we plunge into those ones, I wanted to ask you, what was your general impression after you read the play? How did you feel? What did you like or dislike about the play, The Last Hope by Ekpe Inyang?
Well, one thing I thought about, you read, what's it called? A Streetcar Named Desire.
Okay.
By Tennessee Williams in one semester. And with that play, you got this literature feeling while reading it.
Okay.
That the text was poetic, and I didn't get the same feeling with The Last Hope.
The Last Hope. Okay. 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 That's an important and interesting remark. Yeah, and I would refer you to if you have time and you're free and you want to, there is another play by Ekpe Inyang, which you can read through the AU library, known as The Heel Barbers. I think in that one you might come closer to the feeling that you had in the other play that you first mentioned, the Tennyson's play. Yeah, I think that one is quite poetic. I found that. Yeah. Yeah, and this is bringing me to something. Yeah, one thing with this play. Remember that this play was commissioned. This play was commissioned by the GIZ, and I find personally, as I don't want to say a scholar of Ekpe, but let me just say, as somebody who is reading a lot of stuff by him, I actually find a lot of significant differences between his plays that are commissioned and his plays that are not commissioned. Yeah. Yeah, I even discussed this with him in an interview last was that last summer, I think, yeah, or thereabouts, when I interviewed him in Stockholm. I have the interview somewhere on YouTube. Yes, I think it seems to me that his plays which are not commissioned seem to be richer and more complex than those that are commissioned. And a good example I'm giving, which you can read at your free time, is The Heel Barbers. On which I published an article in 2018. That being said, who has more of their feelings or impressions to share more generally about the play before we dive into more questions? Because I have some few follow-up questions here, and then we go to the questions that you have. The people in Zoom, anybody has something?
I can share my thoughts. I just felt like the whole conservation project seemed a little like a joke.
Mm-hmm.
Like they don't really get anywhere.
Yeah.
And that was really sad. So that was just the feeling I was left with, like, this is not gonna happen, is it? Yeah. So it was, yeah, tragic, honestly.
Mm-hmm.
But taking into account the readings, aside from the play for today,
yeah.
It makes sense. Like with the background information, like this is just another instance of conservation gone wrong, or not really doing, like, they promise things, they don't deliver. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. I get your point. Thank you for sharing that with us. Thank you.
I have it, but I think it's more of a general comment.
Okay, just go ahead, please.
Not just for this play, but for any play. So I don't know how relevant it is, but I always have a hard time with the characters, the persons, because of all the different names, and we don't get a lot of background information, so you can remember that this is this person's cousin or sister or mom or whatever.
Wow.
So, but it's not only this play, it's
more general about plays. And I really share that comment with you. I think that's also my problem. Like we easily kept some names in Oil on the Water, for example, and we knew the names and we knew who the people, like we easily relate with the characters. I think there are very few plays where we easily relate with characters, or we live to remember the characters' names and their actions long after we've read the plays. And the only plays I think so far that I've read in my life are Shakespeare's plays, and then also plays by Wole Soyinka. I don't know if you know him, but I think I mentioned him on the first day. Wole Soyinka is the first Nobel Prize winner in literature in sub-Saharan Africa, and he's actually from Nigeria. So he was the first person to win the Nobel Prize for Literature in sub-Saharan Africa. And he has written a lot of plays. I think one of his plays is The Trials of Brother Jero. And yeah, I continue to see Brother Jero in my mind long after I've read the play. But many other plays that I've read, I mean, I think like plays that have not come close to the qualities of Shakespeare's plays or Wole Soyinka's. I find it difficult keeping the names of the characters and linking. Yeah. I don't know. Does anybody have the same feeling? Okay, then I'm really happy that I've heard this, because sometimes I used to think that, do I have a personal problem? So now I know that many other people have the same kind of feeling. Though I actually started my writing career by writing plays. So the very first thing I wrote in my life in the second grade was a play. Although I've instead published poetry now. And then by the time I was finishing high school, I had written 4 plays, but I've not published any of my plays. I think I will have to go back to them and work on them before I may ever publish. But yeah, so I actually started writing plays, but I have this difficulty with plays as opposed to keeping or to relating with characters in novels where a lot of background information is provided and you know the relationships between the characters, but it's very difficult to keep track of the relations in here, because usually the name of the character is mentioned on the margins, and then their speech bubble or what they have said is written, and yeah. Okay. So that's shared across the board. So I think we've already answered one of the questions that I wanted to ask here about are the characters relatable. I told you that I had some follow-up questions here, so we've already answered the question about. But which of the characters at least do you still manage to remember in the play? As we all remember that this play, or recall that this play chronicles or tries to, it attempts to chronicle, to summarize a conservation project, the corrupt project, right from inception to a time when there is a kind of financial crisis. Yeah, and so the one act, or each act, covers a number of years and a lot of stuff that happened in between, and it's actually part of an evaluation project, a project that was aimed at evaluating, an exercise that was aimed at evaluating the effectiveness of the corrupt project. And so the play is like a spin-off or a fallout of that exercise. So I will be asking, we all agree that it's difficult to keep the names of characters in plays or in many plays, but at least which of the characters is most remarkable for you in this one, and why?
Hello, can you
Yeah.
hear me? I was thinking a lot about the conservator and how he's just named like his job, and he's just so insensitive, and he doesn't even like consider the people. So I don't know which page that is. On page 16, he says, that is what the law says. Anywhere in the national territory, that is the law. No hunting, no fishing, no farming, nothing of that sort. And I mean, that's like what the people have been doing for a long time. That's like their culture and their living. And he's just, yeah, very cold in that aspect.
Okay.
Which I also find funny, because I was like always trying to picture how that would look on a stage, how they would like make the characters stand on the stage. Yeah.
Yeah, he's like a stock character. He's like a stock, more generic and representative, and maybe accidentally for the author, he is not only representative in the sense that the author intended, but also very representative in the sense that we have, like, in our own critical understanding of the role played by these people sent by government and conservation agencies, because they usually sound they usually sound too much of patronizing. They patronize, and so they always seem like they have instructions that they're dishing out to people who must obey them. And this, curiously, is very similar to the situation in the play, in the French play I mentioned today, the Screaming Forest, or Le Cri de la Forêt, the play by Henri Njombo, which is in French. There is a character in that play who is also named in a more generic sense. So I've even translated that play, and his name is like the functionary. So if you don't call him the functionary, or you just call him the civil servant, you may just call him the civil servant or the forest agent. So he too does not have a real human name. And he also comes with a lot of instructions to give to the people of the community, telling them that henceforth you cannot fell any tree if you have not been given a license to do so. And so in the same situation in that play as in this one, another thing that we read already is the absence of productive collaboration between government agencies and local communities where they want to carry out the work of conservation. Because we should have even, although yes, he's actually in a meeting, conservator is actually in a meeting with the people of this community, but the way he is in the meeting, it is not actually a meeting where he's asking their opinion about what should be done. It is a meeting where he's already giving them, he's already instructing them, he's already informing them of what is supposed to be. And the same thing happens in the other place, and we should have expected at least to see maybe another government agent or some government agents who actually come and sit with the people to discuss and decide on those things. Because I think one of these articles talks about this idea of the fetishistic disavowal of, I think it's the article about producing poverty, the fetishistic disavowal of conservation projects, meaning that oftentimes natives or locals end up being in between accepting the project and rejecting the project. And one of the reasons for this, I think, is because they are not sufficiently implicated in the planning, in the original planning of the projects. Does that say anything to you? So I agree with your comment about the conservator here. And let's go back to the remaining follow-up questions that I had. How much didacticism is portrayed in the play? And then the other question, let me ask the two so that anybody can pick anyone. The other one is, what specific insights do we think the play provides on fortress conservation in the corrupt area and beyond? So we have two questions to answer. One is about didacticism. How didactic do you think the play is or is not? And then the other one is about any insights you think the play brings to the idea of fortress conservation that we have discussed today?
I'm not sure this is the answer you're looking for, but you told us that in regards to this fortress, it was covered, right?
Yeah, fortress conservation. Fortress.
Yeah.
Yes. Let me write it here. Okay, just go ahead. Yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah, that people weren't allowed to be in the area, and they couldn't do whatever they were used to, and I guess that's the same thing here, where I can't remember what characters, but there are two that are arrested because they keep going into
the forest. I think that is Kondo and another guy. I think Kondo and Era. Yeah, Kondo and Era. Yeah.
And they've been warned many times, but
they keep on going.
They keep on going, but because that's part of their
lifestyle. Yeah.
But they're still arrested or yeah.
Yeah. And the relationship between them and the park guards is not at all cordial and doesn't sound humane in any way. Yeah, because it's a relationship of violence and brutality that ends in a near war-like situation. Yeah. Yeah, and that is actually representative of a lot of these conservation projects in Africa. And so, like I was saying, if you read Green Imperialism and you read particularly, I think he is, what's that scholar's name from France? His last name is Blanc. He has written a book known as Green Colonialism. So it gives you a lot of insights as to the stark difference between conservation in Europe and conservation in Africa. Because if you go to France, for example, you can go into a protected zone and you see people who are actually living there. They have their homes there. They even have their little farms in that zone. But when it comes to Africa, people are asked to quit. Because in Europe, the people are not regarded as being a threat to their environment, but elsewhere, people are regarded as being a threat to their own environment. And so I think that it is actually high time the model of conservation in Africa was rethought. It is high time it was changed. Okay, so we had the other question about any possible insights. Do you have anything to say in that regard? Okay, we have already talked about fortress conservation, and the other question was about didacticism. Okay. Yeah, and this play, as one student observed, because I used this play too in another course in the comparative literature department, and the student made this observation that he thinks that the play speaks to what he calls the limits of the didactic mode. And so he tries to enumerate some of the didactic practices in the text. And this is more, not only the situation for this play, but the situation more or less for all of the explicitly environmental literature, that it tends to be quite didactic. It tends to have something to teach. It tends to have a set of values that it wants to inculcate into the audience or into the readers. Yeah. So, and generally it's like pro-environmental behavior that it is sought after. So that I think that's the same situation for the last hope. But now, can we maybe go into the questions that I sent you earlier? Okay. Okay, the first question. So in view of education officers insistent that the forest, that is the national park, is a natural bank for the people of Korok and their offspring, how do you assess the last hope in the light of the perpetuation of neoliberal conservation as discussed in the article? Yeah.
Well, one thing we talked about the commodification of nature,
Mm-hmm.
And just calling
Nature a bank.
nature a bank, exactly. And also some of the lingo that education officer uses, saying, use it's a natural bank. You don't need to be told that nature provides for everyone of us free of charge. Use the interest as it grows, but maintain and protect the capital.
Yeah.
Which is clearly capitalist.
Yeah, capitalist language. Yeah. And I'm really wondering why Ekpe would use this language, because he's actually a conservationist by training and by profession. I'm wondering why he he really goes for anyway. But let's say it's actually is it the education officer? Yeah, that's the education officer. And this language is very capitalistic. It's very, very capitalistic. And so it leaves us with no doubt, therefore, that conservation is driven by capitalism. Yeah. There is no argument about that one. Did somebody want to add something about neoliberal conservation and display? I think we've already said a lot of that, and we'll be saying it again and again as we go through the other questions. And then I was curious, and I just went to the website of GIZ, and then as I was reading through, looking at their relations with Cameroon, and then I came to the section on collaboration in terms of environmental protection, and then something struck me. They said that their approach to conservation is that of protection by utilization. I say, wow. You see, protection by utilization. So how do you situate this? Because we know that GIZ actually commissioned this play, The Last Hope, and GIZ has the approach of protection by utilization. So how do we link it to the idea of selling nature by preserving it? There is a direct link, isn't it? Yeah. So it means that you don't see that from both from the sponsor of the consultancy, through the consultant, and even the characters in the play, especially the characters that represent conservationists like education officer or conservationist, all of them are moving in a direction of selling nature to protect it. Yeah. The next question says, assess the last hope in terms of the production of nature and poverty in Africa. Do you think, after we have read this plate right to the end, irrespective of what the seeming gains that somebody like, I think, is that Ira? No, the other guy who has a nice house, the one who has a nice house and thinks that his cousins are jealous of him. Kondo, yes. Yeah, irrespective of a character like him, who actually seems to have made the best out of the project. Are we convinced that the people of that locality have been taken out of poverty? Yes. Yeah. For the most part, they have not. His cousins who he's accusing of being jealous, those he's accusing of having misused their money, and instead of investing it, they have used it, and that's why they're not rich. And then I think the way that Kondo behaves, I really suspect him. The guy who has the nice building, the guy who has the nice house and the nice chairs. Yeah, I don't think that it's only because he has taken his money and he has then got invested into rearing pigs, because I think he has some pigs. Is he the one who was, yeah, he has pigs. He's into like pig farming. But I suspect him of being like also into some malpractices within the project. And this is even hinted in the play, when some of his cousins accuse him of having kept everything, yeah, that was meant for everybody.
Yeah, as one of them also points out that there was talk about some schools and
roads and health centers, which are not delivered. And those are the general promises. That's the sing-song of conservation in most African countries. They always come with these promises. Yeah, of course, they might build one small health center somewhere, or maybe one small school and dig one small road. But that is never actually what is expected in terms of the economic value of what they take out of there. Yeah. So by the time the play is coming to an end, another thing that even leaves me, or that at least gives us clues as to the fact that people are still in poverty, is the way the people are worried when they hear that the project might be terminated, which raises questions about not just the whole idea of sustainability, because we begin to see that it seems the project may never be sustainably managed if the external donors withdraw from it. But again, sustainability, for I think in the right way, should also go alongside making people from that community who have benefited from the project to be able to continue to live off what they have had long after the project no longer exists. Yeah, but here it seems that as soon as the project stops, everybody who is depending on the project would get back into the same, like they will fall back to square zero and restart again with poverty and suffering and misery and joblessness. Yeah.
That's what I'm not quite sure how
Motia, yes. Yeah.
That's what he gets so angry about, right?
Yeah. That's one of the reasons Motia is very angry. Yeah.
There's also the meeting with the two chiefs, where I think maybe it's Era who says, "I can see you're already working with them."
Exactly.
Yeah, you're already.
Yeah, you're already. Yeah. So you're already on their camp or in their camp, and this again. You remember our reading about petrocultures and stuff like that. You remember how the Americans, when they come for oil in the Gulf, in the Persian Gulf, what they do is that they first try to have the sultans, all these Muslim leaders, traditional rulers, into their camp. And once that is done, nobody cares about the rest of the people. And a similar thing also happens even with conservation. So like the most important people in quotes in the society, if they are traditional rulers, if they are kings, if they are brought over to the side of like the chiefs, and the chiefs here are actually representatives of the king, they're kings, because that's how the kings are called. Even the term chief is more like from, I think from the colonial perspective, yeah. So once they are on the side of the project and they derive personal gains from that, the only thing they do is they try to protect and promote and project the project as being the best, and without actually caring to listen to the genuine concerns of the other people. Yeah. And so one other question, the next question we should be discussing here is a question about not only ethics, but also a question about justice. For whom are the laws in the play made? For the poor and the powerless, like Kondo and Ira, like the guys who are caught in the forest who have gone to hunt, or for the mighty, like the Honorable Beko? Who do you see? Do you think that people are equal in front of the law in the play?
Well, at least you have this, as you already mentioned, the gap between the people in power and the rest of
the population. Yeah.
Because also, Honorary Beko says on page 40, we in Parliament, underlining, us people with the power.
Yeah, the powerful parliamentarians. Yeah.
Exactly. So there's, I guess that's also what I'm, most confused about. The fact that the government are never there to actually support the local people, their own population.
Exactly, and that's something that's very common in much of the literature I'm dealing with, and that's why one of the articles in my dissertation I want to talk about something I call absented presences, like reading the absence of government through the presence of what should not be. whether it is in the case of people who do not have access to potable water and then they are drinking water which they pollute at the same time, or it is in the case of people like this one where you don't find the government is usually very, very distant from the people. Yeah. And it's actually their responsibility to work for the people, to be closer to the people. But the tendency is generally for them to be in complicity with either foreign NGOs or foreign multinationals, and they work against the people. And then one stark, glaring example of irony or paradox in the play is that Honorable Beko is actually moving around with a bag filled with wild animals that have been caught. But he says that they're in the parliament, and he said, because remember there is the mention of the word bushmeat there. That's how we call game in Cameroon or in much of Africa, like wild animals caught for consumption. Yeah, we call them bushmeat. Remember, he has a bag, and in that bag, he says some people have given him, people like offered him some bushmeat, which he's taking back to Yaoundé. And this is a guy who works in parliament and whose job is with the other people to draft laws that protect the animals, but he breaks the law. Breaks the law. Yeah. But then at the same time, you find him trying to bring peace between the locals who have gone to hunt and the forest guards. So there is this double standards, double standards in the way that law and justice are being executed in the play. And so, and this leads us to the next question. Does the play depict instances of environmental injustice or justice? If yes, comment on some of them. Even just what we have mentioned is already an instance of injustice. The fact that you break the law and you're even a lawmaker, but you want the other people to respect the law is an injustice. But then also like the brutality with which the forest guards handle the guys they catch in the surprise in the forest hunting. Yeah, that even amounts to some forms of like human rights violations. And this just reminds me, as we are talking about the irresponsibility or the near invisibility of government in this play, or even in the other plays that I've read, or in the other literature about conservation. Some people even think we can use the term outsourcing. Now we have governments that outsource nearly everything. They outsource all their responsibilities. So the meaning that they give out their responsibilities to third parties to be carried out. And we can illustrate this in this play, especially in the last act and since, in the meeting in Yaoundé with the minister. What do you see? Don't we see that the project is actually happening because of the EU donor and I think the GIZ, yeah. So it's like a government that abdicates its responsibilities and passes them on to the other people. Although the play tries to end on a kind of hopeful note, optimistic note, because a certain minister has called on phone and is promising that he will recruit the guards, or that he will take over the payment of the personnel of but that is not even very convincing.
No, I was just about to ask, you think it would have ended like this if it wasn't, a commissioned work? If it wasn't a commissioned work, wouldn't the ending happen?
Yeah, it's quite possible that it might have had a different ending. Perhaps maybe at the end, the whole thing would have been just chaos. Nothing has worked, maybe, yeah. Because one thing you should know is that both a text like this play and the reports that conservationists write on the field, most of these things are geared not even towards the workability of the project, but towards making sure that the NGOs continue to have funding from their donors. which means that in some cases, even reports, and there is a case of this, not only in an essay by Ndinga, the guy I mentioned from Congo, Brazzaville, in one of his essays, but also in one of his novels, where a conservation officer who is actually European is writing a report to send to the headquarters in Switzerland, but omitting important facts because those facts can paint a bad image of the project and they might, and then funding may be discontinued.
But is this play written for like locals, or is it for more like the Western?
I think it is more or less written for the locals, at least for the country. Yeah. But again, we never know how far it will go. Okay, let me say it in other words. This play, we assume, at least, is written for maybe the people around the corrupt national park, because as we know, the corrupt national park actually exists in Cameroon. Yeah. And the GIZ has actually been a partner in that project for a very long time. And then this play, if it is actually staged in those places, well, it can encourage more people who are still resistant to the project, maybe to embrace the project, especially as it uses this model or this approach of maybe punishing the stubborn guys by making them poor, by making them not have nice houses, and rewarding the obedient guys who joined the project. But at the same time, because it was commissioned, we cannot guess to what extent maybe even GIZ can send a copy of this play attached to one of their reports to one of their donors. Yeah.
I think it can be, but maybe it's just me. I think it can be interpreted in two very different ways.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. Either you can see Era and his guys as stubborn and angry and this I think they call it their anti-development people, or I think it's some Kondo calls them maybe.
Yeah.
Or they can be seen as the heroes who tries to preserve what they're used to have and what they
or who try to fight off capitalism.
Yeah, exactly. So maybe that's depending on who's reading.
Yeah. But I think that in the context, if we take into account the background of the playwright, that the playwright is an environmentalist, and we also take into account the context in which the play is written as a consultancy for the GIZ, then we would say that, yeah, of course, what you have said is very true. It's possible to read it in those two dimensions, but the intended dimension of the author would be the one of reading those guys as the negative guys. Yeah, you get the point. Yeah. But from our critical perspective, we see them as people who are the real heroes of the play. Yeah, of the play. Okay, good. So let's go to the next question, and it says, how did or does colonialism influence conservation in the play?
Well, you already mentioned, the EU donor. Somebody coming in, Western coming in.
And even the GIZ donor too, those two donors. And those ones are even actually representative of colonialism in another form, neocolonialism. Yeah, that's the right term for that, neocolonialism.
Could you repeat what the student said?
I beg your pardon?
Could you please repeat what the student said? I could not hear it.
The student said that the presence of the EU donor in the play, which is representative of Europe, or even the GIZ donor, are already speaking to the idea of colonialism in the play. And then I was adding on to what he said, that this is even specifically an instance or an aspect of neocolonialism, because neocolonialism is colonialism after, in quotes, the official end of colonization. Colonialism that comes in subtle ways of colonization. Colonization that doesn't come again through brutal force and occupation, but through soft power, okay? Yeah. Did you hear that? Did you hear what I said? Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Yes, and if we come to page Let me see. It's at the early beginning of the play. Yes, page 17. The chief, Chief Kitok, reminds the people. He briefly reminds them about the history of the Korop Reserve, which is now becoming or has become the Korop National Park, and it's actually found in colonization. It has colonial origins. If you follow the track and trekked and trekked and trekked, some of you might take 8 hours. As a young man, it took me just 5 hours. Just as you are entering the farmlands at Ikasa Last Bush, you might still see a signboard with the inscription of Korop Forest Reserve. The reserve was created in the days of Dio Edgerton. Dio is district officer, a member of the British colonial administration in the British Southern Cameroons in 1937 or thereabouts, when none of you here was born. And that is actually one thing that I didn't mention all along today, that fortress conservation in Africa is a colonial import. It is imported from the models of conservation that were tested in America, where Native Americans were driven out of their lands, and then large expanses of the forest were declared as protected areas where the rich would go and contemplate and rest. And then that approach has been marketed to the global south, even though it is no longer in use in the global north. And so this instance that we just read here, page 17, is a fascinating reference to the historical colonial origins of fortress conservation in Africa. And that is why post-colonial eco-criticism is important for us when we read texts like these ones, to understand that such things need to be corrected. Because both eco-criticism and post-colonial theory share one thing in common, in that they do not only analyze, they do not only critically engage with issues, but they do so with the hope that wrongs can be righted. Okay, so let's take the next question. Question number 7. To what extent do you think the locals are involved in decision making about, anyway, we've already answered this question, but let's briefly take it again. To what extent are they actually involved? To the greatest extent, not. To a limited extent, yes. Because I think to a limited extent, you will say that, okay, there are meetings like the meeting between the chiefs, or even meetings like the meeting between the conservationist or the conservator and the education officer. At least we will say those also portray some extent of involvement or consultation, but it's very limited. I beg your pardon?
They're still just shut down.
Yeah.
Locals, so
yeah, when they want to express themselves. Yeah. And people who have pertinent questions, although they are treated as like being as disturbing in the meetings. They're like a nuisance in the meetings. Okay. Then the next question, with regard to the last hope, especially inventories of new species and the discovery of Ancestros coropensis, pages 28 to 30, what role do you think literature can play in the dissemination of scientific knowledge? Anyone wants to say something?
Well, we've already talked about
Can you hear him? Zoom, the people in Zoom, can you hear him speak?
Well, somewhat, but it's not loud.
Yeah, speak
Loud.
louder.
You know, we've already talked about the need for art to come across where science can't.
Mm-hmm.
So you know what people will not read in a report, they can perhaps read in a play and then take it in.
Mm-hmm. Or they can watch it in a theater.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Or listen to it in a poem.
Exactly.
Or read it in a poem, or read it in a novel.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you know, in that regard, I believe it can play some role in the dissemination of scientific knowledge.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But I don't know if you would, trust it.
Okay.
As much as you would in a report.
Okay, that's a good question. Yes, I think some people might not trust it. But then for me, I would also, another possibility or another dimension to it would be that literature can trigger more interest in that. So that, like, because literature can, literature has also this propensity for manipulating facts and turning them into fiction, which means that it can still mention scientific facts and we are suspecting that literature has played over them. Yeah, but then we can try to verify maybe in the original sources, yeah. And then this is a beautiful transition, or at least this leads me to say something which I was about to say. I think one of the things that I liked most about this play is that I learned about this discovery, the unseized Troclados corrupt pences that had been discovered there. It's a medicinal plant that has been discovered which has some potential, which is promising that it seems it might be able to produce a cure against HIV/AIDS one day. And I didn't know about this. And I'm actually from Cameroon. And, and it was only when I read this play that I knew about this kind of discovery. But this, and then when I learned about it, this come back to what I'm saying, that like once literature points us to the direction, we can go for other sources where we want to believe it. Because since we know that literature has this potential for manipulating or fabricating things, yeah. So I actually verified, and then I saw scientific articles that had been published with this discovery, yeah. And so I think I would say whenever and wherever that the best thing I took out of this play was that it pointed, yeah, it pointed me to this discovery. Not to mention other things like maybe the different kind of species that are said to have been discovered here and there. Well, I know that we can also bring a critical reading of that, especially in terms of we look at Lideusz's idea of taxonomy. We can begin to question that, but they also at least opens up, it helps us to be aware of the value of biodiversity, but not necessarily in economic terms. At least for you and me, we don't have any intentions of making this vaccine or turning this thing into a vaccine against AIDS or selling it, but at least we know that it has some potential for helping. So, and we've learned that through this. And you now see that if it was left only for the articles that I read in the scientific journals, maybe just people in that scientific field who read that might be aware of it. But if you and I are discussing this today here, it is thanks to this play. Yeah. So I think there is no question about the fact that literature can contribute to disseminating scientific knowledge. But we will always take it with a pinch of salt and want to, yeah, want to verify. Okay. Good. Any remarks, question, contribution from Zoom? Any? Otherwise, okay, we take the next question. Okay, yeah. How much responsibility does the government take for weaknesses in conservation practice in the play? What do you think about Kondo's opinion on ERA regarding the latter's lawsuits against the government? Remember that at one point, Kondo is accusing ERA, or says that ERA is not it's not powerful or it's not intelligent if his intelligence is to be used in pursuing lawsuits against the government. So is the government infallible? Part of the question. How much responsibility does the government take for weaknesses or shortcomings in conservation practices in the play? And what do you think about Kondo's opinion when he thinks that, okay, Ira, because you have been pursuing the government in the court, you are not intelligent? What's our take on that? I think for the first part of the question, it looks like we've already answered it in discussing maybe like the government's responsibility or absence or invisibility. Yeah, I think we have indirectly answered it that way. But let's comment on Kondo and Ira. Is pursuing the government in courts a measure of intelligence or intellect? I don't think. Yeah, of course, it can be true that that in some instances you may be pursuing the government when you are wrong, and if you actually know that you are wrong and you're pursuing them, like it will look like you're wasting your time and your resources. But otherwise, it is completely normal to pursue to take the government to court in a country where the courts actually function. Anyway,
unless you know that they will never cite.
Exactly, yeah, because it's also true too that in the case of a play like this one, anyway, it's a play and it's not it's a play and also again reflecting reality. And even if it was not, at least the context from which the play is produced, in a place like Cameroon, it's very rare to win a case against the government. Nice, it's very, very rare. I'm not saying it's impossible. It happens, but the cases are scattered here and there. Yeah, because the government is like the judicial system. A minister can just make a phone call to a deciding judge, and then a sentence is passed. Yeah. So it's very difficult to do that. But in a country like here, in a country like here in Denmark, in a country like the US or in France, people have taken governments to court on several occasions, and they have actually won against the, yeah. Yeah, it should. But while it is not impossible in countries like Cameroon, but it is very rare. Yeah.
But Ira is a lawyer, or
no, he isn't. He's not even a lawyer. It's actually that he took, according to the play, he took the government to court.
Yeah,
but he's not a lawyer.
Who is a lawyer at one time?
Okay, I think someone is nicknamed a lawyer at one point. Yeah, but he's but he's not a real lawyer. There is no real lawyer in the play.
Okay. Because he's also the one who's very proud of his children because they're getting education. So he could be maybe another lawyer.
Yeah, one of his children might become a lawyer because he owes people like he doesn't pay them. He says that he's using the money to educate his children. Yeah, I remember that one very well. Okay, so do you have a question? Do you have a comment? Do you have a remark to make? Okay, thank you for being part of this course, for discussing this text with me from Africa, but also beyond Africa, for bringing your own perspectives to them. I think that has been very productive and helpful and interesting and engaging. So yeah, I'm actually recording this, so I will stop here now and we say a few other things off camera and then we can part our ways. Thank you again.